Welcome to another episode of the Rolling Thunder Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Kinney.
I'm your co-host, Spence Halford.
Joined by Spence Halford today. Man, I think we say this a lot, but I think we have another good one for you.
Yeah, this is a great episode. We went down to Mossy Oak, to really the gamekeeper's office, or the biologic office, or the Nativ Nurseries office. I don't know. They run so much out of that one place, but it's such a cool spot. It's where we met with Bobby Cole a few weeks ago.
Pretty cool to record in the actual
that's
podcast
right. In
studio.
The gamekeeper studio. That's right. But, you know, Dudley's just such a wealth of information. He's such a colorful guy. He's seen so much life or seen so much in such a short life. You know, he's not an old guy, but he knows so much. And I got a lot of respect for Dudley's head knowledge.
And the way that he shares that with people is so, I think the word I want to use is inviting. Like you're not intimidated by his knowledge.
That's right.
And I thought that was, you know, they're talking about the something or other, Chinkapink and all these other things and things I thought I knew. I thought I knew something about trees, and walking out of there, I was like, I'm gonna need a
he's one of those really brilliant guys that doesn't make you feel dumb. You know what I mean?
That's
even though you totally realize how inept you are at identifying leaves next to him.
Right.
But I mean, he's such an interesting guy, such an intelligent guy, and he has just such a cool air of humility about him. In that regard. And so I think it's neat. One of the cool connections that we're going to talk about in this episode that Dudley and I both made a couple of years ago, actually, and really, to be honest, what prompted this podcast was Dudley's father, who died at a very early age, hunted at a place called Jackson Point, which was and is a really cool hunting club in the Mississippi River Delta. It's between the levees. It's south of Memphis, about, I don't know, maybe 100 miles downriver, maybe a little less than that. But anyways, we made this connection. I saw that Dudley posted on Instagram something about Jackson Point, and I was like, wait a minute, there can't be more than two of those. And the more we talked about it, the more we shared common knowledge about it. And so in half of this, you know, we're going to kind of talk to Dudley about Dudley, and then in the other half, we're going to get Dudley to talk about Jackson Point and Miss Elna, which I was right, it is an E name. I texted him earlier.
Right.
We were trying to remember. He told us about this very colorful lady who, you know, has pretty serious roots historically into where diaphragm mouth calls come from. And so, anyways, it's pretty cool. I think this is a fun episode for folks. And I would just say, for those of you out there that are historians, this is going to be this will be kind of the intro episode, if you will, to at least two or three more.
That we'll have coming later.
Yeah, my grandfather wants to talk about this, and my uncle wants to talk about it. And so we're gonna you know, burn some diesel fuel and try to investigate the story just a little bit more. And I think it'll be fun. I know it'll be fun for me and you, Rob.
count on that. I'm excited.
If you don't like
about that.
If you don't like it, don't listen.
That's right. Well, this is another good one. And if y'all have questions about this, I think as people start to listen, we've kind of peeled back the layers, and we've started to realize there's more and more kind of commonalities out there. If you've heard anything about this place, reach out to us, and we'd love to see where that goes. So,
sure.
I guess without
further ado,
let's get to it.
Get 'em.
Welcome, folks. Y'all come on in and make yourself at home. This here, well, this is the Rolling Thunder Podcast, your home for all things Rolling Thunder. This episode is brought to you by Mossy Oak, because everything is better in Bottomland. Kent Cartridge, quality matters, performance counts. Shen Gear, waterfowl gear that is built better. and Benelli USA. Dominate the skies.
Well, we are in West Point, Mississippi with our buddy Dudley Phelps. How are you, Dudley?
I'm good. We're in the Gamekeeper Studio, as Bobby would call it.
Yeah,
in the bowels of the Gamekeeper Studio.
The mole hole.
Yeah.
There are lots of names for this building.
Oh, yeah.
So, Dudley, we want to know all about you. You're the man behind a couple of things around here. How did you get here? Where'd you come from? What do you do here? Like, give us all the lowdown.
All right. So I'll try to keep this concise, but cover all the bases. I grew up in Jackson, Mississippi.
Okay.
Family had some family land out in the country, and we'd go there all the time and have a good time and hunt and fish and do all that. Killed my first turkey there, and my dad passed at a young age. He was carrying a cooler full of refreshments into the Grove before an Ole Miss game, and he had a previous heart condition. That he kind of preferred to just live life, and he wasn't supposed to pick heavy things up. Wasn't supposed to build shooting houses in the middle of the summer heat and carry bags of Quickcrete. But anyway, we lost him at 43, and he was my best friend and my hunting buddy. And but life goes on, and we had this family farm. I was a junior in high school, and I just tried to pick up where he left off. My granddad on my mom's side helped, and I just developed a passion for managing the land and growing the trees and doing all of that. So it just evolved from there. My grandmother on my mom's side had a biology degree, like in the 30s.
Wow.
A woman.
I was going to say there couldn't have been many people in her class.
I may have the year. I want to say it was in the 30s. But she taught biology. I've got some of her old plant books. So she would drive around and get wildflower samples and identify them. And so I think that's where I got that bug from. But as a little kid, I was always picking acorns up and putting them in my pocket. Whether I did anything with it, I enjoyed
the elements of nature.
Yes.
That's super cool.
So I actually went to school and got a degree in photography. I wanted to be a wildlife photographer.
Really?
So I went to finished at Delta State.
Fighting okras?
Fighting okras. I'd go to hunting camps and take pictures duck hunting, and that's what I did my thesis on, was just being outside.
Were you going to try to make a living doing that?
I was, and I think that's when the ADD kicked in, and I had to do it in real life. It was like maybe taking pictures at soccer games and things like that, and it just didn't work. So I'm like, well, I'm going to go back to, I get stuck in sales world selling cell phones, and one day I just said, I want to go back and become a forester. So I went to Mississippi State, enrolled in like forestry classes, some horticulture classes, and did that. And
would that have been a bachelor's degree?
Like
you were going to work on a second one?
Pursuing a master's.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And so while I was doing all of that, there was a guy in my class that noticed I was really good at identifying trees. His name's Blake Hamilton. And he said, we've got this new little nursery we're putting together for Mossy Oak, and you ought to come check it out sometime. And I went with him a week or so later, and I've been working here ever since. That was, I think, in 2007.
Okay.
And I did what's called the co-op program, where you'd work a semester, take a semester off, and I ended up working both semesters anyway. And, then we started playing with these hybrid oaks. Toxie was real into them. I was collecting them on campus and finding them in the woods and growing them in my backyard before I even started at the nursery.
All right, let me interrupt you for just a second. So the nursery is here in town?
The nursery is, it's closer to Starkville, actually.
Okay. And it's a yard, y'all are growing trees.
Yes, it was a nursery before we got it. They were, growing cut flowers and things like that. And
what constitutes a hybrid oak? What do you mean by that?
Well, so like for example, a swamp chestnut, it's half swamp chestnut, half white oak, or half water oak, half nuttall oak. So the pollen from a male flower called a catkin, that little thing that looks like a tail hanging on the branches in the spring, the pollen lands on a female flower of another oak species, and that acorn forms, falls to the ground, and it becomes a tree. And it'll have characteristics of both parents.
So those oak hybrids exist in nature.
They do, and they're harder to find. They're harder to come by. You know, you think about, 5,000 acorns fall out of a tree. Maybe 3 of them end up being hybrids, and then one of those 3 ends up becoming a mature tree. It's really far-fetched.
So does that hybrid tree, when it drops acorns, are they all hybrid just like that?
They're all hybrids, but they're an F2 or a second generation.
Do they kind of go back to like the rootstock, so to speak?
Right, and so some of them may back cross with one of the parents, and it'll the majority of them will have more traits of so a willow oak crossed with a nuttall, it may back cross to where there's more willow oak. I've never heard of a hybrid becoming its own species. They usually digress back to another
in nature
species after several generations.
But what you guys are doing is intentionally creating hybrids.
Well, we're finding them in the woods, and then we're finding them in our seed, in our nursery. I may plant 30,000 swamp chestnut oaks, and we may find a couple hybrids in there every year. We put them in a seed orchard and monitor them. If I find them in nature, we get a cutting out of the top of the tree, and we can graft that and put it in our seed orchards as well. And so it's kind of like what they've been doing for pine trees. Nobody's really done it for oaks. Some people have, but it just when you pollinate a pine cone, you may get 300 seeds out of that. But if you do it with an oak, you just get 1 acorn. So it's very time consuming, but it's a lot of fun. And I'm not knocking the regular species oaks. We love those too. In fact, we use those probably a little bit more, but we like to plant both. The hybrids exhibit what's called, where's Toxie when I forget another weird word, heterosis, which is hybrid vigor. So like a Better Boy tomato is a hybrid between 2 tomatoes. Silver Queen corn is a hybrid between 2 corns, and oftentimes they'll grow faster. Their roots are more vigorous.
Kind of nature's survival of the fittest. I mean, it's they get the best traits of both parents.
And so that was kind of Toxie and I at the same time kind of fell in love with this whole hybrid thing, and that's kind of what the nursery was built on to begin with. That was our niche. We've evolved into trying to use more diversity. We're doing native grasses, wildflowers, native fruiting stuff like Chickasaw plum, American plum, things like that, black cherry. But we're still trying to, if we can, collect from individual parent trees that we think are superior in some way.
So when you go on your Sunday afternoon walks, you're doing market research.
Yes.
I mean, you're looking for
stuff. Yeah. I can't drive down the street without IDing stuff in my mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's incredible.
But
I'm kind of mind blown. Give us in a couple minutes, talk a little bit more about just the nursery in general. Like how does it function? Where do you sell stuff to? What's the...
Yeah, so we collect the majority of our own seed. The remainder I kind of barter with other knowledgeable people in different parts of the country. And then we plant it and grow it and sell it. We sell a 1-year-old air pruned containerized seedling. It's grown in a fancy pot that encourages a fibrous root system. So the root ball is about the size of those little Dixie coffee cups you see at the office, little 8-ounce.
The ones that aren't big enough to put enough coffee in.
Exactly. And that is a perfect root ball size.
To burn yourself, yeah.
Yeah. And, the seedlings are all one growing season old. They're 16 to 36 inches in height, depending on the species. And we've got a website. And we, wrote really detailed descriptions about everything we offer. And folks can go to that website, pick what they want. They can call and ask me questions. it might be somebody in southern Iowa that, doesn't know exactly what to plant, and they call and we help them pick out what to order. We've got instructional videos on YouTube about the actual plants and how to plant and maintain them so they'll grow fast and survive and thrive.
Mm-hmm. There's got to be some form of seasonality to that business, though, right? I mean, is there
there is
life
now
cycle and you're selling through your inventory or something?
Right. So we try to have everything up for sale starting when we get back from Labor Day weekend. Some parts of the country, the nights are getting cooler, and that's when we just open the floodgates, so to speak.
Okay.
And then, usually by mid-June, a lot of the northern folks are done ordering and planting. So that's kind of our peak. The beauty of these containerized seedlings compared to bare roots is, the bare root nurseries, they have to dig them when the plants are dormant and ship. So we have a wider shipping window. Mm-hmm. If somebody's willing to, some people have a big backyard and they may want to plant 5 trees back there. Theoretically, somebody in the South could plant in September if they're able to go out there after work and put some water to it. But if you're 2 hours away at the hunting camp,
right,
it's best to plant in that window for your area. All right, that's safest.
Okay, so let's. We've got 2 other wonderful co-hosts here.
No,
and
this is working
if y'all
great.
Just
I'm liking it.
Make yourself, at home and have some Uncle Ray's chips.
Yeah,
Dudley and
I need to move in a little closer. You guys are very, very focused in a one-on-one. So, like with your like a chestnut oak or a white oak hybrid, something like that. What's your planting window? And then when y'all ship a seedling to somebody, what's their immediate action they need to take? Do they just Go ahead.
Let me rephrase that question since me and Dudley are having a conversation.
Y'all are. This is the Spence and Dudley show.
I was literally about to ask a similar question. I was going to say, let's talk about my place, Little Reno. It's in the river bottoms, very similar to, the Delta, right?
Gotcha.
So we're below the bluff, very sandy ground.
Is this inside the levee?
Well, we don't have the levee on the Tennessee side because we've got the bluff, right?
Gotcha.
So Memphis is the bluff city. So we're at the bottom of the bluff. We're between there and the river. So it's a natural levee. So yes, it's equivalent to inside the levee on the Arkansas side. We're just on God's side of the river. Mm-hmm. But we have no oaks because they've all been timbered, and now we've got tons of pecans.
All that Chicago Mills land from yesteryear and all.
Yeah. And we have tons of hackberry and pecans, and we joke that we have 25 oaks and we know them by name. So,
right.
If we wanted to start to better our farm with hardwoods, that's kind of what you were going with, right? Question wise.
Yeah.
How should we do that in a calendar year?
Well, the traditional planting time in the South that works best with these containerized seedlings is, I always say, when the ground gets wet for the winter in December. So the leaves have fallen off the trees, and you start getting winter rains. That's usually in early December in that neck of the woods. That's when you can plant.
Okay.
And then I would say April 1st is probably your cutoff, but it'd be better to get them in earlier because in the wintertime in the South, the ground is warm enough for that tree to grow roots. So you want the most roots you can have before the summer drought hits.
So even though you're not seeing green leaves and stuff, those roots are taking hold.
Right. So, we had one of the driest Junes on record. So it would have been better to get those things in the ground, December, January than February, April, because they're going to have more roots by the time that drought hits. Now, you guys inside the levee or whatever, you also have a lot of seasonal flooding. So a lot of folks that live in their places in between that floods, a lot of times for insurance reasons, they may plant some stuff in the fall and then plant again in the spring, just in case you have they'll do 50-50. In
case you get a March flood.
Just to mitigate your
flood.
risk.
Yeah.
But on that same note, we had some customers in that huge flood a few years ago in the South Delta where water stayed on until July and August, and their trees lived. It's really hard to figure all that out. But
what about frost? Are you worried about that, or a deep freeze in February?
Not really, because they've evolved forever to handle frosts in February.
Okay.
We're storing them outside in the wintertime, so they've
already been through a winter by the time they're getting to us.
Yep.
I'll be dang.
What time do y'all plant them?
We try to get everything in the ground, and we probably grow 50 different species. But we start planting in a greenhouse in February, and we're finishing up right now. It depends on the species and when they sprout, or we're trying to get everything to a similar average height. So some of the slower growing stuff or things that root quicker in the spring, we get them in the ground first. Like our plums are just sprouting in our walk-in cooler, and we got to get them in the ground.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned a couple of fruits like plums, and the one you guys mentioned the other day on the restoration of the bobwhite, or the plight of the bobwhite quail, is a great episode, by the way. Talk about those fruits. Are these trees or are they bushes?
Chickasaw plum is kind of the main quail plum. It's a suckering plant, meaning it reproduces clonally and spreads clonally or by seed falling on the ground.
Okay.
But they grow really clumpy and bushy, so it's good cover for upland birds and rabbits and things, hiding from
taking notes.
Avian predators, that hawk flying around over the field you see when you're in your deer stand.
Yep.
You want some Chickasaw plum out in your, we call them sage grass fields, but you know what I'm saying.
Yep.
CRP looking.
Yeah.
You want that cover, or maybe some winged sumac, or further north there's little dogwood thickets. That's the purpose that serves. And there's other plums. We've got Mexican plum here in the southeast. It extends out into like Nebraska and Oklahoma, but it's more of like a very small tree, and it drops fruits in the late summer, early fall, whereas Chickasaw plum is June and July.
Are the fruits of those plum trees eaten by the upland birds, or is it primarily just the shape of the plant that provides the benefit?
I would say it's more just the shape of the plant, the insects that inhabit the vegetation that fall on the ground, the cover. But, deer and other animals will eat the fruits. I'm sure if a deer eats one of the fruits and it kind of half of it falls on the ground, something will peck at it, But that's one thing I'm trying to encourage our customers to understand, is it's not all about the fruit or the nut that falls out of the tree. It's about the whole ecosystem.
Right.
There's certain insects that like the leaves of those plums that, it's all
that a particular bird likes to eat, or a particular.
Yeah, it's all part of the big picture.
Yeah. I've never thought about that, but a tree itself is habitat. I mean,
it is.
Yeah.
You can plant a tree in a place and that becomes a home for something.
Right. There's a guy that's named Doug Tallamy. He's got a cool website called Homegrown National Park, but he's done a bunch of studies in the past, and I want to say he identified over 400 different like moth and butterfly that inhabit oak trees.
Wow.
And that's so important, because those little caterpillars and worms that, that bluebird gets to take back to the nest. So it's not just the acorns. There's so much more to it. That black cherry or your plum or your persimmon where you see all those worms in it. We used to try to spray something to kill those, but, we're learning that it's not going to make the tree die, and you're feeding your baby turkeys and stuff too with that.
So fascinating.
I know nothing about trees now. I thought I knew a little bit about trees, but now I'm like, nope, I need to go get a botany.
It's fascinating, and I'm a sponge for it too. I don't admit to knowing everything, but I just obsess over learning as much as I can about it.
That's super cool, though, that you went from being a field photographer to, you found you managed to find your way into a career that you're passionate about, and that's pretty exciting.
Right. And I was a horrible student. I would make A's in certain classes and D's in others, and I never really even finished. I did I got hung up on that big paper, and
you got the job you wanted.
I'm happy where I am, and I can learn from all those, researchers like Bronson Strickland, and I can learn by what they're doing, and read all their publications.
That's awesome. Well, we're grateful for your knowledge. I kind of want to change gears on you here and throw you a curveball. So you and I somehow, and I don't even remember exactly how we made this connection.
I think I shared a photo on Insta or something.
That's probably what happened. We made a connection that is it your dad?
My dad,
okay.
Big Dud, and Granddaddy Dud
hunted at a place called Jackson Point. Was it called Jackson Point back then?
It was either called Markham Island or Jackson Point. Is it Island 65 too? I can't remember.
It's an island and a number, and
right.
It's 60 something. I don't know if it's 64, 65, or 66, but it's right in there in the mid 60s.
And my grandmother hunted there too, Nana. So just to bring the two of y'all up to speed and our listeners at home, my grandfather is one of the charter members, and I think he was a charter member of this place called Jackson Point, which is also known as Markham Island. And we were comparing notes, and I think you may know better than me, but I think that your family and their associates, their hunting buddies, hunted there when they leased it from the timber company. Correct.
Or something along those lines.
Correct.
And at some point in time, we're gonna dive into this in a couple more episodes, but at some point in time, the timber company decided they wanted to sell it. And a group out of Helena, West Helena, bought it. Mm-hmm. And my grandfather was somehow lumped into that group because he sold he had a hardware store in Memphis, and his buddy that lived in West Helena had a hardware store in West Helena. And so Dudley posted this picture, and it's his grandmother fishing in a place called Ham Lake. And I'm like, Ham Lake? That we started texting back and forth, started comparing notes, and this place is wild. I mean, what are your earliest memories of Jackson Point?
Well, I never got to go. So,
it lived in stories then.
Yeah,
from
Granddaddy Dud died at 55. Big Dud died at 43. But so sometime in, I guess, Dad, mid-30s is when that property sold. And, gosh, he was in his mid-30s. That's kind of hard to join a big hunting camp at that time.
What are we doing with our lives, Dudley?
It was a shack on stilts at that time with a couple of Willis Jeeps parked under it and a water heater on top of the roof. And everybody stayed in the same building. There was a galvanized aluminum tub that they all bathed in. It was men and women, which is what was so unique about it. Wow. So there was this woman named Eleanor Wrestler, and her dad was Mark Ham. So Mark Ham had all this land.
Okay.
And Eleanor learned how to turkey hunt. And so she taught my dad how to turkey hunt. My granddad, they were just these Jackson city slickers that were part of this hunting camp, and they would go, my granddad and dad were bird hunters, in the Jackson area. Mm-hmm. But somehow they got involved in this turkey stuff, and they'd go deer hunting during Thanksgiving. But it was a family thing. My aunt would go, my uncle would go. And it was Coach Johnny Vaught from Ole Miss, back in the Archie Manning days. The Pools, which Buster Poole was a assistant coach. A gentleman named Billy Mustin, who I believe was also an assistant coach.
Okay.
And some Clarksdale people and some Memphis people is the best I know. But so Miss Eleanor, I actually killed a fall turkey with her when I was younger, my second turkey, at a place called Ward Lake that she also had a bunch of land at and helped form, best I can understand. But
so they hunted it up until the 80s.
I want to say around 83 or 81 or so.
My mother sent me some pictures in preparation for this podcast, and best I can tell, the first time that I went to Jackson Point was in 1986 or 87, and I would have been 4 or 5 years old. I was little, very, very little, and it was brand new to my grandfather. Like so that had to have been within the first couple of years that they had bought the place. Mm-hmm. And it was, all of my childhood hunting and fishing memories to speak of are from down there.
Right.
We went down there fishing because Ham Lake was, the river would back into there 2 or 3 times a year, and every time it did, it would be just loaded. And so the rule of thumb was 2 weeks after the river gets out, it's time to go fishing. And
Right.
my grandfather would watch it, and I mean, we would catch those black brim that were, you know, big enough to fillet. So when I was a kid, like that's my earliest fishing memories are my dad and my granddad would say, if you can't fillet it, put it back, you know.
Right.
You know,
very game rich area.
Yeah.
And it had turkeys when nowhere else did. You know, down south of there around Green, there were turkeys down in there too, like the book, The Flaming Turkey is just
right
30
there
or
in that
40,
area.
50 miles south of there. But it's fascinating to me. And so Miss Elna, people called her, you know, we're teaching men how to turkey hunt.
That's
And
crazy.
so
Did she use a box call? What did she use?
she was, you know, squishing latex between a piece of lead like a lot of people did back then.
She was making mouth calls.
Making mouth calls. And so
Daggone.
one of the coolest stories about this is that I remember is that, so my dad and Will Primos were in the same class in high school. They grew up together.
Wow.
And so my dad went to State, Will went to Ole Miss, and somewhere between the fall of 72 and 74, Dad invited Will for a fall hunting experience. And they went, and the story I hear is that Will walked in, and there were these women sitting around the table pulling multicolored prophylactics out of a box, condoms. And they were cutting them up and making mouth calls. And that's kind of what, you know,
Let that sink
the
in
light
for
bulb
just
in
a
Will
second.
Primos's head. And so my mom tells me that I think it was Coach Mustin at some point heard about this machine that would stamp aluminum. And so he bought, well, maybe it was Coach Poole, I can't remember, would stamp these aluminum frames. And then these turkey hunters would get on the phone and, oh my gosh, we got this, you know. And so I'm not real sure who to credit with that, but then they started, you know, smashing them in those frames. And it's fascinating, you know, even, so they had friends that hunted in other places, but they were just getting on the phone and sharing information. And, you know, my mom says, I remember when they realized that there was this waterproof tape that they could use. And they get all, you know, they were using gauze tape. But then they started stacking the frames. And, you know, like, you know, the true double, the true, you know, it's just fascinating.
It's amazing to me that, I hope I'm not stepping into something I don't want to get into, but it's amazing to me to just kind of listen to your story. And at first blush, when you said your dad was 43 when he passed away, man, that took my breath away because I'm
47.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm sitting there thinking, gosh, I can't even imagine what leaving my family's not ready for me. You know what I mean? That would leave such a huge void. And then your grandfather at 53?
Yeah, he died before I was born.
But then to think about kind of parallel that with the plight of the wild turkey, and to think that, you know, there's some women on an island in the Mississippi River making mouth calls that, I mean, that's how we put food on our table these days. Both of us, you know, I mean, we all, the wild turkey has sustained us, and there's some women in the Mississippi River Delta who kind of sustained this part of the tradition when they weren't turkey hunting in 50 states back then.
No,
I mean,
I've got my grandmother's model 1100 20 gauge 2 3/4 inch full choke. And I've got to kill a turkey with it.
Yes,
you definitely do.
But
that is so fascinating.
and it's fascinating to me that the head coach of Ole Miss football, that Coach Archie Manning, would take a bath in a galvanized tub in the middle of a cabin.
It's not very Ole Miss-like, is it?
Yeah, I don't think that would happen anymore. But
Rob,
they're out of the Tiffany pewter. Yeah.
well, Rob is a gigantic Ole Miss fan,
right.
and are you an Ole Miss fan?
I had a stint at Ole Miss. I didn't last very long.
Okay.
But, yeah, I finished at Delta State.
Well, he's been real proud of their national championship this year, but I can see him beaming. Now he's going to be telling everybody that from the Ole Miss lore, they started turkey calls.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I can handle that.
That's all right.
We don't have many national championships, but we started the mouth callers.
Something like that.
You're welcome for your job, Spence.
Yeah. That's such an interesting story, and the fact that you got to hunt with Miss Elna.
Well, it's neat how the turkey hunting community back then, they didn't have the internet or anything like that, but they would somehow figure out who all the turkey hunters were. So it may not have been Coach Mustin that discovered the aluminum, the frame press, but he probably heard about it from somebody and just got one. And then,
That's so cool. Just like rumors from afar, and it's like it comes together.
Yeah. Do you know, as a side note, where the island got the name Jackson Point?
I don't. I know I have an ancient duffel bag that says Jackson Point Hunting Club and Dudley Phelps on it. And that's cool. I cherish it.
I bet you do. I wondered if it had to do with Jackson, Mississippi, or it seemed like I had heard something about Andrew Jackson crossing the river right there.
Yeah, but I think that's probably more like it.
Okay. Well, I'm going to find out. We're going to – so my grandfather is 91, and he bought 2 memberships in the early 80s, and we're going to let him tell that story because he didn't have 2 nickels rubbed together, and I'm dying to find out how he found the money to buy into this thing. I think his initial – I'm going to probably get this wrong, but he'll correct it. I think initially his memberships were $30,000 apiece.
The buy-in.
The buy-in.
That's tough for a 35-year-old man to swallow.
In the early 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, with, interest rates where they were, and, I mean, the economy wasn't exactly booming in the early 80s.
Yeah, so –
And they're now trading for, 300 plus, I think was the last number I heard.
Big old houses everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We still have a double wide.
That's the great big double wide in the sky, probably.
Yeah, exactly. So there'll be some interesting history, and we may have to circle back with you and compare some notes after we do a little.
And, like if anybody's listening to this and knows any Mustins or Pools, I think Alexander may have been another last name.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of currently prominent Arkansas figures and Mississippi figures. I think Sheffield Nelson is still a member. And
I have so many unanswered thoughts.
Questions.
Yeah, questions.
So thank you for that. We don't do that well enough, but we would love to hear from somebody if you know anything about the history of Jackson Point, for sure. So, well, I think we've met our time limit.
Yeah.
And we've covered a lot of topics. So thank you so much for your time, Dudley.
Oh, enjoyed it.
We need to get an order in for trees, and Little Reno needs some more oak trees. So
needs a few more. You got enough pecans.
I know a guy.
Good.
Perfect.
Good. Well, good to talk to you, and thanks so much for your time. And we will, I guess we'll catch you on the next episode.
Sounds like a plan.